humans understand, we dealt with the first part of that chapter. And what was the conclusion? Fill me in.
That worship should be orderly.
Okay.
And that if you have the gift of tongues, you should use it, but only if it can be interpreted by someone.
Is that meaningful? We don't have too much tongues today. Some people purport to have that. So I was thinking as we thought about that, or as I thought about it during the week, the gift of tongues was something that they might have been tempted to overemphasize. And so I began to think, well, what is there anything in this 21st century that we might be tempted to overemphasize in our worship service? If we would call it a worship service, I'm always on the warpath.
I think people profess to be able to heal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's, boy, and that's, we think if only we had some of these powers that they had in the first century, we would just fill up the church and we'd, have to turn people away almost if we could heal people. And yet, in the first century, they had that power. Some people accepted, but many didn't. They had the gift of speaking in tongues and impressing people in that way. And some people were, as he says, it's a gift for non-believers to get their attention. It's not really for believers because believers need the gift of prophecy or teaching.
And nowadays, it might be that a congregation might try to show how well it's doing, how much they've been blessed by God by building a big ornate building, and having all the best of furnishings and all the latest technical equipment and everything else. So that might be a way of impressing people.
That kind of came to my mind. Technology is a way that, you could show off. Of course, we have great technology here and great personnel to handle it. But, if that's all that you emphasize, and as I thought about that, the word, what comes to mind? The word entertainment. The word entertainment. And that came to me as a phrase that kind of covered the gift of tongues in a sense that was kind of an entertainment. You hear somebody spouting off in a language that they haven't learned. That's impressive. That kind of entertains you. And today, maybe we are not entertained by that, but we're entertained by other things. I was visiting a congregation in Fort Worth, Texas, when I was traveling there regularly, and they said, come to our swing music concert. Swing music, but it was a spiritual music concert. That's my favorite kind of music, is swing music. See, that would attract me because that dates me, but I didn't go to that, but I thought that was interesting that they thought that was a way to get people's attention, maybe especially the older people's attention, to play swing music with it. I don't know exactly what the hymns or they combined or how they did it, but anyway, but that's the temptation always, isn't it? To seek, when we come to honor God, we really would like something that keeps us involved and, appeals to our senses. So that's one of the dangers. The other question that came to my mind as I thought about these first verses in the 14th chapter was verse 12. And I don't want to repeat what all was done, but he's saying, if I do not grasp the meaning of what someone is saying, I'm a foreigner to the speaker, and he's a foreigner to me. Well, so it is with you. Since you are eager to have spiritual gifts, try to excel in gifts that build up the church. And we can, that's logical. But the question comes, how do you do that? And it also raises the question, spiritual gifts. We think of a spiritual gift as an arbitrary blessing that God gives this gift to you, and gives a gift to me, kind of outside of our control. I may have a gift of, fixing things, or I may have a gift of playing the trumpet, and God gave me that gift. But this verse seems to suggest that we may have something to do with spiritual gifts. He says, try to excel in gifts that build up the church. So does that suggest that we can, how do we do that? Does that mean we, I don't really have a gift, but I'd like to have it, so I'm going to seek after it? Or does that suggest that we try to look at the gifts we have and then work on some? You may have a gift of playing the trumpet, but you may not know it unless you spend a lot of time with it. Am I right? There's other gifts like that. You may have a gift of teaching, but unless you do it, you may not recognize it.
I think one thing would be a willingness to explore different gifts. And okay, you might fall flat on your face if you try this gift or that gift. So, well, okay, that's not for me, but then, okay, be willing to try another one. Sometimes people they're not willing to go out of their comfort zone and try something new because they're afraid that they're going to fail. So maybe that's what we need to is don't be afraid to fail at something.
Yeah,
Give it a try
yeah.
and see, and okay, maybe you're not gonna be good at that, but at least you've given it a try. And again, sometimes you try something once and it doesn't work out, but maybe that was just a bad day, a bad group that you had something, and maybe try it again. You might succeed.
Yeah, that's something that we need to keep in mind. I was saying, I pick on music. We had a fella here years ago who was working with us for a while, and he liked to sing, but he didn't have much musical talent. And he would turn into the book, a songbook, and say, well, that sounds like a great hymn. Let's sing it. And we'd say, well, we've never sung that hymn before. And we know that you can't read music, but he'd say, let's try it anyway. And great enthusiasm. You may remember he was with the Harding team years ago, one of the young men. But somehow that gift was not manifested in his repertoire of leading singing. And if you've been around the church long enough and visited, you probably have seen some guys leading singing that had no business leading singing. but they wanted to, and they had enthusiasm, and that's great. But on the other hand, we need to seek out, and he says, you try to excel in gifts that build up the church. How do you do that? I thought one of the ways you do that is you try to refine that gift. The guy who came to mind is Greg Watson. Greg was in the marketing area of fast food companies. Well, he worked for McDonald's for a while. He worked for Olive Garden for a while, and was involved in menus of restaurant. But what's he doing now? He's going to Sunset School of Preaching in order to seek to excel in gifts that edify the church. He's given some good sermons here, but I'm sure he felt that a need to dig deeper and to be better prepared to deliver meaningful sermons, and to do the other work that an evangelist or a preacher is involved in. And not only him, we've got other people here who are attending graduate school in the area of religion to be better prepared to be servants of the church. So that's one way in which you seek to excel in gifts that build up the church. That's what I don't know. Jim Springer, a minister that we supported for years, and we still support his wife. He was raised at Northwest. He was gung-ho to become a missionary in Germany. And he talked with some veteran missionaries, and they said, don't come. Don't come until you have better prepared yourself to be a minister, a preacher, a missionary. So he enrolled in the Harding Graduate School of Religion and was there for at least 2 years, I know, but he prepared himself to excel in gifts that built up the church. Started, well, one thing, started to study German, which was something that he needed to, if he was going to exhort the church in Germany. So anyway, those are just, so a gift to, as I read that verse, it's not all or nothing, It's not, I have this gift and I'm ready to do whatever I need to do. Sometimes a gift needs to be refined. Sometimes it's through school, and we've got graduate schools at every conceivable subject. But sometimes it involves just putting it into practice, I would think. You think of anything else comes to mind, how you would seek to excel in a gift? Yeah, we think today, well, if it's worth it doing, somebody's got a graduate's degree in the thing, I don't know. But that's, they didn't have a graduate school in the first century. How would they have sought to excel in those gifts? We think of the gift that we looked at earlier on. What were some of the gifts? Gifts of giving, gifts of service, gifts of ministry. Just try to be more active and learn. Gifts of cooking. How do you refine your gift of cooking? I guess you try more different recipes or whatever. Anyway, those are the two thoughts that came to mind as I thought about the 14th chapter of 1 Corinthians there. So I guess we're about the verse 26. That's where I thought I'd jump in, which is called orderly worship in this edition, but I like orderly meetings, because when we meet, we worship, yes, but we prepare for the real worship, which is what goes on from day to day. So what kind of meetings did they have? Did they have, we used to say in the church, 2 songs of prayer and a song and then the sermon. But now we don't, now we have about 6 songs in the sermon. And then, so the orders are different. But is that what they had?
It sounds like they were kind of spontaneous, where they'd have a group of people who would come together. I don't know if this is talking about like on the first day of the week or whatever it might be, but they would come together and then kind of, I guess, just be there, and then, you know, suddenly someone would have some kind of inspiration and they would stand up and start talking, or maybe speaking in tongues, or speaking as a prophet, something like that. And then maybe they would sit down and then someone else would get a spark, and then they would stand up and start.
That seems like it. To us, that seems disorderly, because we like to have, we don't have them anymore, but for years we had printed programs, right? Some people liked them, some people didn't, but anyway, it gave the secretary something to do. But there are religious groups in the world that meet just like you've described.
I think I've heard the Quakers used to meet like that.
The Society
they
of
still?
Friends. As far as I know, yes, or at least some of the groups do. They just come and sit. And there's no agenda, there's no minister, there's no order of activity. They sit until someone is motivated to say something. Maybe an announcement. It may be a word, you know, some edification from the word of God. I guess it might be a psalm. I've read some books about it there, but that seems to be the way. Is that a good way to go?
A lot of us would be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Unless, especially, you know, us would be used to a more formalized schedule.
Yeah.
That we just sit, just like, I think a lot of people, when you're sitting with another person and you have an extended period of silence, you start to feel a little uncomfortable, and then you just end up saying something just to break the silence.
Yeah, we're uncomfortable with that silence. We'd be looking at our watch after, not 5 minutes, after about a minute and a half, right?
As a Quaker, I don't think the entire congregation sat together. I think they separated, you know, the women and children, and then
Well,
the men.
maybe some, in the Jewish synagogue, they were all there, but they were separated physically. But anyway, that's just, when we're now, this is a situation in, as we read these chapters of 1 Corinthians, they had, and these chapters are entitled, you know, spiritual gifts. And so maybe things were a little bit different then, that the Lord would, if you will, tap someone on the shoulder and motivate them to speak in a way different than today. I don't know. I suppose it would be okay to try that. But on the other hand, maybe given our situation, we need to do it the way we do. I don't know. What do you think? Are you happy with the way we do things?
That's all I've ever
We're used to it.
experienced, so.
Yeah. I mean, we switch things around for the sake of variety. We used to have the Lord's Supper earlier in the service. As I say, when I grew up here, they tried that, and a lot of people thinking that the Lord's Supper was the kind of the ultimate goal of the service. They partake of the Lord's Supper and then leave before the sermon. So, well, we'll fix that, and we moved Lord's Supper to the end of the service, so they would stay. Anyway, but we tend to order the service in the way that kind of pleases us. You know, like I said, we used to have the hymns kind of more spread out. Now we have them all in a group.
You know, Ellen, when I first attended Church of Christ, I read I'm a member of the Church of Christ.
Oh, that little booklet, yes.
And so once I read that, I understood how things
Okay,
was conducted.
yeah.
And I was satisfied with it because I felt that it was the right way.
We try to incorporate the things in our meetings, if you will, our worship that we find in the New Testament: prayer, preaching, singing, offering, the Lord's Supper. Those seem to be the things that they did, and those are the things that we incorporate. So we don't have much more. We could, I guess, we could incorporate all of those things in connection with a meal. Seems like they did that. That'd be kind of interesting. Anyway, there's some. When you come together, everyone has a hymn or a word of instruction, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation. All of these must be done for the strengthening of the church. If anyone speaks in a tongue, 2 or at most 3 should speak one at a time, and someone must interpret. If there is no interpreter, the speaker should keep quiet in the church and speak to himself and God. Seems like there was more, they had a lot of people willing to speak or do something, right? Our experience sometimes in the church, just another anecdote is, we used to have a man appointed to make sure there were people sufficient to fill all the roles in the service, to pass the trays, to lead the prayer, to officiate. Sometimes that guy had a hard time finding people because people would hide. Men would hide, literally. I know young men years ago, we used to have a store down the street. I know some young men used to go down there so that the guy couldn't catch him there, ask him to do something. So it's always been a little wonder to me as I read this chapter, how do they have so many people willing to speak when it seems like in our own time, more people would like to hide. Anyway, maybe that was the inspiration of God. But 2 or 3 prophets should speak, and the others should weigh carefully what is said. And if a revelation comes to someone who is sitting down, the first speaker should stop. And for you can all prophesy in turn, so that everyone may be instructed and encouraged. The spirits of prophets are subject to the control of prophets. That's an interesting. In other words, nobody can go, I just couldn't control myself. You know? No, that's not the way it worked. For God is not a God of disorder, but of peace. So they seem to be at kind of the opposite extreme. A lot of people willing to speak. And so maybe God has some things to say at that time that they needed to hear, but they needed to hear in an orderly fashion. And then we come to this, as in all the congregations of the saints, women should remain silent in the churches. They are not allowed to speak, but must be in submission, as the law says. If they want to inquire about something, they should ask their own husbands at home, for it is disgraceful for a woman to speak in the church. So what's the purpose of this paragraph at this juncture? It's in the context of the spiritual gifts that are being manifested in the church. And it's in the spirit of decency and order. It's not a verse that authorizes somebody to go around and hit a lady on the head if she wants to say something. But it's in the context of what, as he says up here, if someone has something to say, someone has to give way. So that's the context in which I see these verses, but they're consistent with the verses we had in the 11th chapter, and we have First Timothy.
So does this mean in the first part, well, where it talks about, say, orderly worship, it doesn't specify that only men receive this kind of inspiration to stand up and speak. So does this, that if a woman did somehow feel that God is inspiring her to get up and speak, that she shouldn't?
Well,
And why would God give a woman that inspiration if now we're saying, and does the fact that it doesn't specify a gender in the beginning of it, I just, why would God give that kind of inspiration to a woman?
well,
And then Paul says, well, yeah, but she shouldn't express it.
at least in the context of the group meeting, it seems to say.
And of course,
First,
you have the other, what if she's not married? Or what if her husband is died? Then again, she has no opportunity to express herself. And
at least if we in the context of the meeting, maybe there are other opportunities to do that. Because there's a woman prays or prophesies in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. When does that occur? Pray, you can pray certainly silently, but prophesy.
And of course, my other, another observation is, is Paul saying or implying that, well, men are able to control themselves, but women, they're kind of hysterical, they're likely to lose control and not give. It just bothers me,
That's right.
that he makes such a blanket
It's a
statement
question.
about, prohibiting a whole gender from being able to speak, not to say that there should be women preachers, I mean, I'm not gonna get into that, but, the fact that he would prohibit, everybody, all women, just because some might get a little emotional, and I mean, men get emotional.
Yeah, oh yeah, I don't know that has anything to do with it. Somebody who can't, control themselves. I think in this context, he's saying somebody needs to give way, and this is what he thinks is appropriate in this context.
I don't even know if this is just about the expression of gifts. It seems more to be about the interrupting with questions.
Well, that
Because
too,
what
yeah.
it says afterwards, like trying to learn something and asking a question is pretty different than expressing revelation from God, I would say.
Yeah.
Maybe they had a problem there and the people were interrupting and said, well, what's going on? What's this mean?
It's interesting that he doesn't say, now this is for Corinth, what does he say? In all congregations of the saints. And what does he go out and say? They are not allowed to speak, but must be in submission, as the law says. What law?
He's talking about the law of Moses.
Must be. And if so, do we have, where's our charter for synagogue worship that the women can't speak or they don't?
Well, when
In the
I think
Orthodox.
you said it earlier that, at that, if this were a Jewish, exclusively a Jewish gathering, that the women would not even be sitting with the men. that they would be in a completely separate, and I think there's like
A
a
balcony
curtain
or,
or
yeah,
something in between.
and the Orthodox,
Two different.
Oh,
courts.
okay.
what's that?
The temple had two different courts.
And the temple, yes, and, they couldn't even enter into the inner court of the temple. But where's the charter for, it's not there, that, the point is, what in the world could he be talking about if he's talking about the law? You know, the cross references in the different places, the different Bibles that I looked at, refer back to Genesis chapter 3, where, you know, the so-called curse is enunciated. Genesis 3:16. To the woman, I will greatly increase your pains in childbearing. With pain, you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. Rightly, wrongly, that's what the Lord said. I mean, he said it. That was what he wanted. And
Well,
It was,
the men were educated in, you know, religion, where the women weren't.
as a rule, that was the case. Yeah.
And I remember there's another, isn't there another place where Paul says that, that's just the natural order that men should be,
Yes.
because that's, Adam was created first and
Yeah,
was
yeah.
created later, so that's, seems, I don't know,
That's what he said
that's God's
earlier.
preferred order of some, I don't know,
Well,
hierarchy.
it's what God did. I don't know that he would even say there's a hierarchy, but there's an order of things. For man did not come from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man. For this reason and because of the angels, we talked about that. And this one says, because of the law. But we could say, well, the law is nailed to the cross. But anyway, this is what his teaching is in the context of the meeting and the gifts. And it seems consistent with what was said elsewhere. So,
It seems to me that all organizations, there's some ranking, right? Whether it's informal or formal, not military necessarily, but there has to be some kind of ranking going on. To have leadership and followership, you know, it just naturally kind of follows that way. I think the bottom line is Paul's saying all women and men are equal. Spiritually speaking, before God, we're all equal in value. But in some ways, the men outrank the women. I know it's hard to accept, hard to hear in our culture today. Back then, it wasn't so hard to hear, but it is here. It's in here, and that especially applies to the upfront leadership. You know, that's why we have elders up front and then leading the congregation publicly. Even though women are leading right now, we have teachers upstairs. Women are leading children to Christ, so they have a leadership role in many ways. But in some ways, he's saying men outrank the women, and he has been accused of some bad things by some women that don't agree with him. You know, but I think that's why we kind of stay with that here in Northwest.
yeah.
Some people that they can't swallow that, they have a hard time swallowing that. But I think that's, rather than err on the side of being kind of reckless, we err on the side of caution. And I think that's a smart way to do it. I think that's a wise way to proceed. And that's the way we've done it here, and I hope we always do. But there is some ranking, I'm saying, there's some ranking that Paul's calling here. And the men outrank the women in some ways, so. I think that's bottom line.
I'm not sure that I like the term.
You don't rank, well, that's kind of what's going on in a way. Informally, formally, whatever.
If that's how you want to put it,
Maybe as best I can put it, maybe you can put it better. But
We're yeah, we're anxious to rank things.
Yeah.
Because
That's our human tendency.
some of us, well, we weren't, some people have been in the armed services, weren't rank. But would it be more useful to say function? People have different functions. I don't know.
Yeah, that's right, it's a good word too, yeah.
Function.
But like any organization, there has to be a bottom line authority, right? In a church or in a business, in the government, somebody has to have a bottom line, or the organization falls apart. That's the way things work in our world. And the way God set it up, the elders of the local congregation have that bottom line authority, in my opinion, and that. And of course, the qualification, one of the qualifications for an elder is that he has a wife, you
Yeah,
know, and children. So, you know, the elders are always pointed in the male direction, not the female, see? And that's by Paul and others. So that's why we have male elders and they have bottom line authority in certain matters in the church. And that's the way I understand it. Without it, the church would just fall apart.
overseers,
You know, there has to be a bottom line authority.
a group of qualified individuals serves the function of overseeing.
Right.
We're getting off the little bit. I think the eldership in the early church, and this is just, was similar to the overseers under the Jewish organization, where a bunch of guys would sit at the gate, and by reason of their age and experience, would be called upon to make judgments with regard to the village or the little town.
That kind of carries over.
And they didn't have an election. And they didn't have, well, you meet this. And Paul gives some love. But I think as an individual, I'm just speculating and talking, as individuals matured and became viewed as kind of community leaders into the Jewish community, then they'd say, Brother Samuel, you sit with us at the gate and help us make this decision. And I think that may have been kind of the way it was in the eldership of the early church. Brother Justin, you've been, have a lot to offer, sit with us and help us make these decisions. I know, and I'm not saying that churches have elections and other procedures for choosing are wrong. I'm just thinking that maybe that's the way it was. And so it's more of a functional thing rather than what we say. We elect a guy as a president and he's the boss. I'm not sure that that's the way that it was.
No, Jesus is the boss. That's
Yes.
the way to look at it. He's our boss,
He's-
ultimate boss. But you have elders serving as under shepherds under Jesus.
Yeah.
That's the way God set it up. That's the way Paul set the
Yeah.
church up. So we're serving as under shepherds, and we have certain bottom line authority in certain areas where Jesus is the ultimate authority that we always look to for guidance, But he doesn't make a decision on whether we're gonna put a new roof on the building or we're gonna hire a new preacher, whatever. Elders, local elders make those
Somebody
decisions.
has to fulfill that function, yes. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church. Now, we think of the head as the most important part of the body because the brain is there and a bunch of senses are there. But Paul, maybe he would have said, well, wait a minute, you can't have a head without a foot. You can't have a head without a spleen or whatever else you've got in your body. So it's a function too. Christ is the head of the church. He's the Savior. As the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands.
See, there's where what I'm talking about there a little bit.
Yeah.
The man has some rank there, a little rank, spiritual rank, really more spiritual than anything. To be the spiritual head of his home, and men, I guess, are to take leadership roles in the church too, the way I understand it.
A man should serve as a head, I guess, to provide. But what's in a sense, the implied command, if you will, is to the woman to submit. It doesn't say to the man, make sure your wife submit. the command is to the women, if you will. And same thing in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, it's to the women. Somebody's got to submit. Somebody's got to,
Right.
anyway. That's, yeah, we want to, some are uncomfortable with these comments in this 21st century. We need not be that way at all, because these are God's directions, as Dan says. But
There's always some, what we used to call a picking order, There's always a kind of a picking order. I don't care what organization you're in, you're gonna find it. Okay, church, family, government, businesses, somebody's at the top kind of pecking down the others. And so, like you say, people got to submit to that pecking order, so to speak,
but I think
order
Paul
for the
would
government
say
function.
the head, you can't have a head without all of this other. And so who's to say the head is more important? Who's we have our elders to oversee. Is it more important to oversee who puts the roof on the building than to take food to a sick member? Is the one more important?
No, it is important, period.
It's important.
We want to meet in this building, you gotta have a roof, it doesn't leak,
Yeah.
or we'll drive us out of
And if
here.
if the church is gonna be a loving institution, we've gotta have people teaching those children's classes. We've gotta have people doing every manner of service. So, it's not up to us to say what's more important.
Yeah, that's true. I don't think the Bible places such importance on leadership as our society does now.
You gotta have leader, but you gotta have followers.
They're all over the place, that it's the job of schools to train everybody to be leaders. It's not really practical with how society works. How can everybody be a leader? In fact, most people end up serving underneath someone and are not well as to themselves. You have to learn how to do that, function in the working world and in other ways too, in a relationship. You can't have everybody trying to lead all the time.
Christ is the head. In a sense, he's earned that right by his giving his life, if you will.
I think there's I think the reason that in schools, children are always taught to be leaders is that everyone can exercise leadership, whether they have a certain, wherever they are in the organization hierarchy. And leadership is, it's a tool that's useful in any situation. I think it connects to inner strength and graciousness and a strong personality. And I think that can apply to the church too. There are opportunities to lead, whether you're in a leadership position or not. And you can have I hear people say, sometimes I'm not an elder, or I'm not a deacon, or I'm not a minister. I don't, how would I even begin starting a ministry or continuing a ministry? I think that just focus on what's on your heart and what you feel that God is calling you to. And I think the church needs to be supportive of people in the ministry.
I think we should all see ourselves as leaders, bottom line. That's where it starts, right? You're a leader, Linda, you're a leader, Linda, Kathy and Diana, we all do leadership type things, take on certain responsibilities, just being part of the VBS, showing a little leadership, whatever. And then it kind of goes up from there, into more specialized leaders and formal leaders like an elder, So we should all start with seeing ourselves as a leader, just like Jesus was a leader. He's our ultimate leader. that we follow every day. So that's all, leadership's a part of everything,
Thank you for your wisdom, and we will take up something easy next time, the resurrection of the body.